So my take on its meaning is it's finding beauty in imperfection. So it's where things are not exactly as you were hoping there would be, being comfortable in that place. So rather than just saying, well, I'm comfortable with the uncomfortable, it's leaning into thinking, actually, there's real beauty and magic in this that is not perfect. Um, so my experience of bringing this into coaching conversations, as an example, is it's a really lovely topic when someone has talked about, I'm a real perfectionist, and when things aren't perfect, I get very frustrated. And it just seems like a different way of opening that up. Yeah, and so of those concepts, I'm sure people will have heard of lots of those before. I'm wondering which ones of those you've heard of, as in heard of and used for yourself, Damien.
Hmm. Yeah. So I was just reflecting on a comment that was on the chat panel.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I suppose I'm quite interested, Paul, because I think conceptually you can understand a concept like this, but there's a
yeah,
different knowing when you're talking about bringing it into your practice.
yeah,
Um, and I think it may just be helpful, therefore, if you just perhaps deepen that a little bit in terms of
yeah,
perhaps any experience that you've had around actually bringing this into your practice. So I imagine majority of people here are coaches and are quite
yeah,
interested in that as a question.
yeah. Sure, sure. So maybe because how I bring it into my practice, I often have a visual image in my head. So maybe I'll share that because when I first read about it, I read this story. The image sits with me. I'm completely confident that this will be different for different people. But there was the story goes there was a Zen monk called Sen no Rikyu. Again, I can only apologize for my attempt at Japanese translation. And he had a Zen master, and he said, I'm going to leave for a couple of weeks, and your job, your role is to tend the garden. That's the task I'm leaving with you. And when I come back, um, the practice is you tending it. And when I come back, we'll discuss it. And so he left, and then the Zen monk um, did everything that he could to keep the garden as neat as possible. So he was pruning, he was sweeping, and it was pristine. And when he heard that the Zen master was back and he was going to come into the garden, he asked the master to wait for 1 second, and he ran over to one of the trees where there was this beautiful blossom, and he shook the tree so that some of the blossom and the leaves fell onto the ground. And then he went back to the door and he opened the door, and the master came in. And my take on that when I read it was, if the garden was too pristine, it takes away some of the magic. Blossom on the ground um, gave a different feel to the garden. So the the concept of imperfection in this sense is it's not pristine, it's not perfect. That image of the blossom on the ground helps me when I'm in conversation with someone and I notice an element of clumsiness or clunkiness, or I hear or I find myself saying something I think that's not very elegant. That's not me at my best. And it'd be very easy for my perfectionist self to say, Paul, you're not doing a very good job here. That's not perfect. That's not pristine. That voice, if it's taught, if that is loud when I'm coaching, that diverts my attention from the person I'm with. So if that image pops into my mind, and I find that helps me to settle into the moment and think, I wonder what's actually going on here. That can be helpful. And I like the language you use because I think that's really important. It's not just knowing this is a concept, it's to me, it's what does it mean to me in the moment, so that I can be responding to what's actually happening.
Yeah, and I suppose if you,
Does that make sense?
well, it does, but it's sort of taking me down a number of reflections, actually, I suppose, which I just want to play back to you as I'm listening. One, really the piece around presence and being very much present in the moment. And I think about the Japanese garden, and I suppose naturally, not naturally, but they often want it to be looking as though it's natural rather than it's been, perfectly manicured. So
Yes.
I suppose I notice the intent of imperfection in some ways, and the impact that has. And then the sense of the duality that perfection can create, because this has to be perfect, so everything else can be disregarded. And then I suppose the third thing, it just naturally connects me to appreciative inquiry, that sort of sense of, I think about the origins of appreciative inquiry and beholding a piece of art. Often when we're looking at artwork, which is often maybe imperfect with some people's eyes, but actually seeking for what's we see as perfect,
Yeah.
I know they're just some reflections that I wanted
to. Yeah, thank you. I like that. I'm happy to share, because you did ask. So in that sense of appreciative inquiry, being there to notice what's there and work what is. If I've got a specific example of a conversation that took place, and I'm not going to mention any names, obviously, because it's confidential. But I was working with someone, and I asked a question, which even as I was asking it, I knew this is coming out a little bit tongue-tied. It wasn't particularly elegant. It wasn't a well-phrased question. The intent was positive, and I noticed a sense of judgment in the other person's face, so my coachee. And I remember judging myself and noting judgment or frustration, or there was something going on. And in that moment, I had the flashing image of, right, so these are the blossoms on the ground. That wasn't ideal, but it is what it is. And it gave me more ability to sit and notice the expressions in the other person. And so I said, can I share something with you? I'm noticing. I'm not sure that was my greatest question. I know we've worked together for a while. It didn't feel particularly elegant. And I noticed a shift in your expression on your face and a change in energy. And I'm wondering what that might mean, or how that might be relevant. And they were really surprised that I'd noticed anything in their demeanor or their face. And they ended up saying, well, actually, it's really interesting you say that, because I get an awful lot of feedback from my team and colleagues that I am impatient and frustrated with them when they don't achieve, but I never say anything to that effect. So it gave us the ability to go a little bit deeper. So we had a conversation about, well, maybe it's not just the words, but it's the tone. And for me, it was a really lovely, specific example of, being really able to be open to the moment, rather than me being stuck in my own, it's got to be perfect. And because it wasn't perfect, it wasn't good enough. That really sticks with me.
Yeah. So can I offer something else?
Yeah.
So I suppose as you're talking about this, so it brings to mind, there's a coaching client who I was working with, who I was really judging because of the way that they were showing up. I really felt like they didn't want to be there, and it felt like really hard work. So there's lots of things I wasn't happy with in terms of our relationship. And I can remember taking this to supervision, and I can remember my supervisor saying, they said a phrase to me, which was, I'm hearing that, and they're still there. you know, because they'd shown up to a number of sessions. So she was saying to me, so they still want something because they're there. So you're still like they're getting some value from it. I suppose my frame of the perfect client was actually becoming quite rigid in terms of our relationship. And by her reflecting that back, of course, I went back and I contracted with them and we tried to reset things. But I suppose what I'm noticing in your example and that one I'm just sharing, there's a bigger capacity to be present with the other person.
Yeah.
And I think perfection of, as you're talking about this often, is that rigidity that comes through, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Lovely. Lovely. Thanks, Damien. I was just looking at some of the comments and questions. They're really lovely. Just Elena's asked if there is a response from the Zen master in that story, and so I'm going to share with you. I don't know. I can't remember the end of the story. I don't know if it was even in there when I read about it or not. So I took learning from it without answering the end of that. Mm. Yeah. Some lovely other comments as well.
Yeah. And I suppose then picking up on that last one for Alexandra, perfection versus authenticity then, Paul.
Mm. Yeah, I really like that. Um, I love that perfection versus authenticity, and it can be quite authentic for some people to own that there's a part of them that can be perfectionist. Um, there's a depth to that, but I like what Alexandra's saying, which is if we're aiming for perfection and we're constantly pouring energy into that, it can be exhausting, or aiming for something that can't exist. Which isn't a nice link to about if you're aiming for something. Because there's a when I've talked about this in the past, there was something that someone said to me which really struck a chord, which is they were saying, are you then saying it's okay when stuff goes wrong? That's just a bit mediocre. And that didn't sit so well with me at all. There was something about this concept is not saying don't prepare, don't talk, don't work out what you would like to happen. But when you are in the moment, you can be with what is. I quite like that. Do you know, you might have shared with this me many years ago. Is it Carl Jung that said, when you are in conversation with someone as a therapist, learn all of the models and tools you can, but put them to one side when you're in conversation with person to marvel at the human self. I probably got those words slightly wrong. The intent's there.
Yeah, but I suppose there's something around perfectionism or having to be perfect is quite splintering, you know,
Yes.
with the experience. What I'm hearing you say is in the imperfection, there's perfection, a bit like the garden. You know, in that perfect garden, there is perfection. And I think that's the challenge for us because otherwise it becomes quite a duality. So, you know, it's not perfect, rather than what you're saying is this is about taking a broader view and things may not have gone right, but there will still be things in there that have gone right. Is that a fair
Yes.
reflection?
Yeah. And hearing that language reminds me of that. I think there's a link at that deeper level, which is whatever's going on, there's something of value. Quite links to the growth mindset work of Carol Dweck. So I quite like that sense of whatever is going on, there's richness that if you are of a growth mindset, you can go find what it is.
Yeah. And I'm conscious, you know, recently on our CPD day, I ran a session on, you know, being good enough, you know. I suppose I'm just picking up on this point. This isn't about being mediocre, you know, this
No.
isn't about, I mean, if you think about any of these Japanese concepts, for me, that it's about the practice. So there'd be a deep practice that's leading up you know, in terms of
Damien, I don't know if others on the webinar, but I locked you there, so you're
sure.
frozen. So just in case anyone else had the same experience as me, what you were just saying on the CPD day
Yeah, about
session on being good enough.
yeah, and I was just saying this isn't about mediocre, this isn't about, like you're saying, preparing, this isn't about it being an art, which coaching is about,
Mm,
you know. So just because something is good enough doesn't mean that it's not a high standard,
yeah,
I suppose is what I'm trying to lean on. So I suppose just other applications, Paul, because a lot of people here are working with clients that might be really wrestling with that part in them is the perfectionist, or they might be working in an organizational culture,
yeah,
which will be familiar to you in terms of a perfectionist culture.
yes.
What would you be encouraging coaches to really take from this concept?
So where it has benefited my coachees the most from what they've shared with me is very much like any time we as coaches introduce a model, a tool, a theory, a technique. I quite like just outlining the concept of Wabi-Sabi, sharing where my understanding of it, and particularly the story. From now on, though, I'm going to have Eleanor's comment, or as Elena or Eleanor's comment, which is, I wonder what the Zen master said afterwards, but that's going to sit with me. Sharing it, and then seeing how that excites, sparks something in the other person or not. And if it doesn't, I let it pass, as is the way. But when I noticed that sense of, oh, that's really interesting concept, and then they bring it to life for themselves. It feels like it's a little bit like a metaphor that they can play with. So in effect, I offer it up as this is a way of considering things. How might that play out for you? So not that long ago, I was introducing this to someone who is in a leadership position. And the reason that we were working together is because some of their team thought they were a brilliant leader and some of their team not so much. And they were getting very mixed feedback. And they were saying, I don't understand what the difference is between one and the other. So a part of the work we did was I introduced that concept, Wabi-Sabi, talked through it, and then offered it up. How might that apply to both of the conversations that you're having with different members of your team? What impact might that have? How might that play out? And what can you take from it? And I think that particular coach, he said what it did is in the moment where the conversations weren't going as well, they felt a little bit more, they used the word grounded, which is more okay with this isn't going very well, but I'm able to notice more and shift the conversations as a result of it. How does that resonate hearing that?
Yeah, well, I'm just noticing Alexandra's comment about, Japanese concepts often center around discovery of self-acceptance. Because earlier when you were talking about the Carl Jung quote, etc., for me, I was thinking about being more congruent, actually. So, this concept of what Wabi-Sabi is just that, for me, that piece of the congruence that comes from that, because we're not negating that something hasn't gone well, or perhaps it's been really challenging, but there's a sense in all of that there's some learning for me, or there's something that can really enable me to grow. And I think if we bring that to our practice,
Yeah,
me, the congruence will be there as a coach, because I'm not trying,
yeah, yeah. You're not trying, you're just being the coach.
Yeah.
I like that.
Hmm.
I also think it's one of the examples where sometimes these concepts overlap. So wabi sabi is the appreciation or the beauty in imperfection. And if we can do that and we're trying to develop our practice, we could link it to Kaizen. So that sense of, well, I'm okay with what it is, and I'm also thinking about what are the continual steps that I can make. And then there's another concept which you can even link into that. I'm going to create in my own Venn diagram, which is Shakata Gar Nai. Again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but my understanding is that is the concept of being able to let go of things that we can't control. Which is, so if something has happened and we can let go that it is in the past, we can't control it, but we can be what is, we can appreciate the beauty in it, and we can learn for what's next in our practice. There's all sorts of those concepts and ways of being that I think can really help us in the moment. Mm.
Yeah. So there's a sense of responsiveness rather than reactivity.
Yeah.
To the event of what's playing out, you know, whether that's
Yeah.
for us or our clients.
Yeah.
Because I think there's beauty in everything, you know, but a challenge for us is often when we're in the grip of the perfectionist, we're seeing the world through those lenses, you know. And I think as a coach, we're encouraging the client to take those glasses off and connect to all of themselves so they can see a fuller picture, which I think this concept for me is really connecting to, Paul.
Yeah. It's interesting. So looking at some of the comments, what I like about this is the language that people are using. I think is spot on, and the feeling of this can pop up in other ways. So people can use different language to describe that feeling of being truly present with someone in a non-judgmental space. All the bits that when we're developing as coaches, we're honing. And I think this is just, to me, Wabi-Sabi is just another lens on those core skills that if we do really well, the best we can in that moment, it helps us and it helps the people we're working with.
Yeah, but I imagine, I mean, it's going to be the same as any concept unless we're owning it for ourselves. It's going to be, you know, again, something that we do to someone else. And yet when we come out of a coaching session, you know, we're judging ourselves for what hasn't gone right, when actually this concepts, we acknowledge that, but actually look for the learning, the growth that's coming, you know?
Yes. Yeah, lovely.
Paul, just because we're running out of time and time flies, but just anything final that you'd like to add to this reflection around psychology of imperfection?
I think if I come back to my intent, which is I have found the investigation into terminology in a completely different arena, in this case, Japanese language and concept, has really helped my practice. And I suppose the one I wanted to share that, and in the hope that it makes a difference. So someone else has an equivalent version of when they're in conversation with someone, it gives them something that they find helpful for themselves. I'm also thinking, I wonder what other things there are that are available that people can draw on that helps with their practice. That's my intent, when we can start to draw from a myriad of different sources that benefits what we're there to do.
And I suppose just as we're running out of time now, just to say that you did write a blog on this concept, which you know, anyone listening in today can look at that on our website if they're interested in reflecting further on these ideas. But we're conscious of time, Paul. I just want to say, firstly, thank you for sharing these ideas with us today. For the group listening, we'll be back together on the 16th of September at 1 o'clock, where we'll be joined by another partner at Catalyst, Boaz Safir. He's going to be talking about concept from Gestalt psychology, the change paradox, and executive coaching. So I hope you can make the time for that session as well.